Halo.
So who is Mendicant Bias? Mendicant Bias was the most advanced artificial intelligence ever created by the Foreunners. When the Flood began to spread through the Milky Way galaxy, Mendicant Bias was put in charge of the Forerunner defences and was tasked with finding any and all weaknesses in the vicious and evil Flood. In 100,043 BCE, Mendicant Bias was ordered by the Forerunners to test fire one of the new Halo rings on a planet named Sharam Hakor, a planet which was inhabited by both humans and Sanshayum, or you might know them as the Prophets. But upon activation, the blast also destroyed an ancient and forgotten prison in which an equally ancient being was being kept, known as a Precursor. This Precursor was also known as the Primordial. After the Forerunners found out that the Primordial was freed, they recaptured the Primordial and held it on the local Halo ring. Then the Forerunners tasked Mendicant Bias with interrogating it to find answers about the Precursors and the Flood. For 43 years, Mendicant Bias interrogated the Primordial in search for the truth behind the Flood, to find answers about what their goals and intentions were. These conversations between Mendicant and the Primordial were recorded, some of which can be read in the Halo 3 terminals on the Lesser Ark. Throughout much debate and intellectual conversation, the Primordial persuaded Mendicant Bias to betray the Forerunners, essentially making him believe that the Flood were the good guys, eventually turning him into a rampant state. From then on, Mendicant Bias led the Flood's assault to destroy the Forerunners and consume everything in the galaxy. At some point during his campaign, Mendicant Bias attacked with a fleet of over 5 million ships and completely destroyed the Maggonaut Sphere, which was essentially a massive defensive wall protecting the Forerunners' inner colonies. This forced the Forerunners to accelerate work on the Halo array. To give them time against the Flood and to help fight Mendicant Bias, the Forerunners created another AI, Offensive Bias. Offensive Bias didn't quite have the same personality, but was far more deadly with his tactics. His main objective was to prevent Mendicant Bias from getting the Flood to the Ark, and giving the Forerunners time to activate the Halo arrays. Now the only way for Mendicant and the Flood to succeed in their mission was to find the Ark and stop the Forerunners from firing the rings. Though he didn't know where the Ark was, but he knew how to get there. For this he needed a Forerunner key ship. The key ships were able to create portals to the Ark, but the Forerunners knew he'd search for them, so they destroyed the majority of them. The Forerunners eventually left one of the remaining key ships as a trap, where Offensive Bias was waiting for Mendicant Bias to find it. When he did find it, this resulted in a colossal, epic, awesome space battle. Like, imagine Star Wars, but like 10 times epicer. But during this battle, all of the Halo rings were fired from the Ark, killing both the Forerunner and the Flood either side, only leaving the AIs to battle each other. Offensive Bias then detonated all of his remaining ships to obliterate Mendicant's forces. Offensive Bias then captured the defeated Mendicant Bias and planned to take him to Installation 00 for study, which is the Ark. In order to prevent Mendicant from escaping and becoming a threat again, Offensive Bias broke down Mendicant Bias into component parts and scattered them throughout the few remaining ships of his fleet for transport away from the Ark, so he would not be complete. Only one part of Mendicant Bias made it to the Ark, so it seems. Another part of Mendicant was left on a Forerunner dreadnought and lost. This ship was later found by the Sanshayum and was installed in the Covenant capital city, High Charity. Mendicant Bias's presence within the dreadnought was known to the Covenant, and he was regarded as an oracle. In 2525, the Mendicant Bias piece on the Forerunner dreadnought in High Charity was interrogated by the Prophets about the Forerunner artifacts on the human-occupied planet Harvest. It turns out that Mendicant Bias corrected the Prophets by saying their holy relics were actually humans, and that the Covenant religion was based off a mistranslated word. They thought a symbol meant reclamation, so they thought they needed to reclaim the Forerunner stuff themselves. But really it meant Reclaimer, which was the Forerunner's designation for the post-activation humans. The Prophets, feeling like a bunch of complete dumbasses, kept this a secret because otherwise the whole Covenant would have broken apart because their religion is just like, now stupid. Shortly after this, Mendicant thought, fuck this, and tried to launch the Dreadnought himself, but was stopped by the hunter worms that were inside the Dreadnought system. He wanted to go and find the humans and take them to the Ark, but the Covenant weren't having any of that. During the Battle of High Charity in October 2552, which is the mission called High Charity in Halo 2, the UNSC AI Cortana fought against Mendicant Bias to delay the launch of the Prophet of Truth's escape on the Dreadnought, giving John 117 time to hitch a ride on it and return to Earth and finish the fight. In the preceding events on Earth, when the Prophet of Truth activated the Ark portal in Voi, Mendicant Bias was carried through the portal to the Ark. Then the missing piece of Mendicant on the Dreadnought was finally reunited with the part inside the Ark systems, making him one step closer to completion. In his higher state, he attempted to communicate with John 117 through the terminals that you can find in the Halo 3's campaign. He mentions he is trying to get atonement by helping the Spartan and the humans on the Ark. Without Mendicant keeping the ground stable for long enough for John to get to the Forerunners of Dawn at the final moments of the campaign, Master Chief would have died on the Ark/ring. Mendicant's final message to John is as follows. And so here at the end of my life, I do once again betray a former master. The path ahead is fraught with peril, but I will do all I can to keep it stable. Keep you safe. I'm not so foolish to think that this will absolve me of my sins. One life hardly balances billions, but I would have my masters know that I have changed, and you shall be my example. The Ark was not completely destroyed after the ring fired, so Mendicant Bias can still technically be alive on it. But even though Mendicant Bias's personality is inside the Ark system, but according to the end of the Halo novel Silentium, his physical form and his extensive knowledge was buried within the desert on the Ark itself, so it is a possibility that the combined elements of Mendicant from the Dreadnought and the Ark systems could recombine with the physical shell and knowledge, making him whole. A metastable AI with a physical mechanical form. Although this is complete speculation by me, because by burying him in the sand, his personality or his mind could have been transferred to the system somehow, so they could have just meant that. And that's pretty much all we know about Mendicant Bias so far in the Halo universe. There's something I want to add to the end of this though. Here's a wild theory that I brought up. Mendicant Bias was basically the Didax AI, so they had somewhat of a connection. So this could possibly mean that Mendicant intended for Master Chief to find Requiem, and was partially successful, so let's break it down. At the end of Halo 3, you and Arbiter must escape the Halo that is about to be fired by going through the portal leading back to Earth. Now only the front half of the ship containing the Arbiter makes it back, while the rear half is floating aimlessly through space. We assume this is because the portal closed while only half the ship was through. If the portal had closed while only half the ship was through, the end of the ship that didn't go through with Master Chief and Cortana in would have still been on the Ark, and they would have been killed by the Halo ring firing. But if the portal changed destination midway while the ship was going through, that is a better explanation of why they survived. Maybe Mendicant put him on a course to find Requiem or eventually float into it, knowing that the only way to release the Didax was with human presence. That's just a wild theory, but it's nice to think about those kind of things. So what about Mendicant Bias in future Halo games? It has been speculated to wit's end that the War Sphinx in the Halo 5 teaser is Mendicant Bias, mainly because of the whole Silentium ending, where they technically bury Mendicant Bias in a desert which looks surprisingly like the Arks. Although it's just kind of coincidence that might be a possible reality, but it's probably just one of the Didax children. What? Or maybe the humans at one point could venture back to the Ark and find Mendicant Bias and maybe have him working for them, helping them do their human-y stuff, like fuck shit up. Also, because he's got extensive knowledge on the Flood, the humans might be trying to find him to maybe get him to help with the new Flood problem that's going to be arising soon. Maybe that's what the big issue is in Halo 5, the Flood have returned. Oh no, we need Master Chief, but Master Chief needs Mendicant Bias. But Mendicant Bias needs... maybe he just needs some coffee. Halo 5 Guardians, Guardi coffees. Halo 5 coffee. But this is where you guys come in. How would you like to see Mendicant Bias come into the future of Halo games? Would you like to see him as a good guy or a bad guy, protagonist, antagonist? So thank you very much for watching, guys. Let's try and get this video to about 200 likes. I think you can do it. 200 likes is nothing. Come on, you press that like button. That'll be nice. Also, make sure you go over to www.ultimatehalo.net and check out our website. Have a look on our forums, say hello, say hi, and make sure you stay subscribed for more epic lore videos and just general Halo content. Nice! So safe, my name is Wangtom. I love you long time, and I will see you next time. Ta-da!
Ultimate Halo. Subscribe now for more unfriggin' believable Halo content.